Commander Voss reporting. It's not Kelzar. It's not a virus. It's...
We're not dead.
The dead hung in the vacuum like grotesque marionettes, their armored bodies torn and frozen stiff. Shattered warships drifted in slow, endless spirals, their metal husks still glowing from recent destruction. This place had been a battlefield, a graveyard of steel and flesh orbiting a dying asteroid. The USS Hecaton cut through the debris field, its hull scarred from countless battles. Inside, the soldiers of the 103rd Expeditionary Force prepared for their next mission. Commander Alden Voss stood in the docking bay, his rifle mag-locked to his back as the breaching shuttle finished its approach. The plan had been simple. Board the derelict Kelzar warship, extract intelligence, and get out. But war had a way of laughing at plans. The ship they found wasn't just abandoned, it had been hollowed out. The airlock hissed open, revealing a corridor lined with something that wasn't metal anymore. Thick strands of organic matter clung to the walls, veined and pulsing, like the exposed innards of some immense, dying beast. The Kelzar were brutal, efficient killers, their ships built for war. But this was something different. The inside of the ship felt wrong, as if it had begun to transform into something else entirely. Sergeant Cade moved in first, his heavy boots echoing in the unnatural quiet. "Jesus," he muttered, "this place stinks like..." A wet, ragged breath filled the corridor. Weapons snapped up. The squad fanned out, scanning the shifting darkness ahead, their flashlights carving harsh beams through the gloom. Something was here, something still alive. They found it near the command deck. The Kelzar general was slumped against the bulkhead, his black exoskeletal armor cracked and slick with oozing fluids. His mandibles twitched, his inner mouth convulsing as he struggled to breathe. This wasn't just wounds from battle. Something had gotten to him. Corporal Venn stepped closer, keeping his rifle trained on the creature's skull. "He's alive," she said. Voss narrowed his eyes. It wasn't possible. The Kelzar didn't leave survivors. They fought until the last warrior fell. This question mark, this was wrong. The general's dual-lidded eyes flickered open. His gaze locked onto Voss with something eerily human. Fear. His mandibles quivered, clicking together as he forced himself to speak. "You should not be here." The voice was barely a whisper, a broken, inhuman rasp. Voss didn't lower his weapon. "Who did this to you?" The general exhaled a wet, shuddering breath. Then, slowly, painfully, he turned his head toward the corridor behind them. A corridor they had just come through. Voss felt something shift, a wrongness in the air, something heavy and suffocating pressing against his skin. His instincts screamed move, but before he could react, Private Ashen vanished. 1 second he was standing at the rear of the squad, the next, gone. His rifle clattered to the floor, still mag-locked to his severed hand. The air was silent except for the faint, slick sound of something retreating into the walls. Cade spun around, his breathing ragged. What the hell was that? No answer. Just the quiet, pulsing hum of the ship's failing systems. The general coughed, dark fluid dribbling down his mandibles. It is not dead. Voss felt the chill claw up his spine. He turned to the squad. We're leaving, now. Cade hesitated. And him? He gestured to the general. Voss locked eyes with the alien. The Kelzar were killers, monsters, the architects of humanity's suffering. But something had broken this one. Something had left him alive on purpose. And that meant he knew something. Voss made his decision. We take him with us. No one argued. They lifted the weakened general, dragging him toward the waiting shuttle as the walls breathed behind them. The ship watched them leave. Sergeant Cade's screams didn't stop when his jaw unhinged. His skin had turned translucent, veins bulging like twisting worms beneath the surface. His fingers spasmed, the nails blackening, splitting apart as something pushed from inside his flesh. Voss had seen men die in every way possible, burned alive in atmosphere ruptures, limbs torn off by Kelzar plasma blades, bodies pulled apart by vacuum exposure. But this was something else. Cade convulsed on the infirmary table, his breath coming in sharp, wheezing gasps. The medbay's scanners didn't recognize his anatomy anymore. His bones had softened, his ribs stretching beneath his skin like moving cartilage. His flesh bulged and pulsed, as if something inside him was trying to remake him into something new. Dr. Harker was sweating as she prepped an emergency stabilizer. His nervous system is shutting down. I need... Cade's spine erupted outward. His body arched violently, the sound of splitting muscle and snapping vertebrae filling the sterile air. A cluster of jagged, bony spines tore through his back, dripping with viscous, dark fluid that did not smell human. His mouth stretched wider, his eyes rolling back, and then a second mouth formed beneath his chin. Voss didn't hesitate. He drew his sidearm and fired. The first shot shattered Cade's skull, but he kept moving. His fingers, if they could still be called fingers, twisted, elongating into black, needle-like appendages. The thing that had been Cade lurched toward Doctor. Harker letting out a wet, sucking sound as its throat split apart. Voss fired again, and again. The creature staggered, its movements erratic, flesh reforming even as it bled out. Then something peeled itself out of Cade's body. It was inside him, had been inside him the whole time. A wet, glistening shape, still half-formed, slithered free from his torn-open chest cavity. It had too many limbs, too many shifting, writhing parts that didn't belong to any single species. It absorbed pieces of him even as it discarded the rest. And it was still alive. "Burn it!" Voss shouted. Dr. Harker grabbed the emergency torch, the white-hot flame roaring to life. The creature screeched, its body shifting, melting, reforming, learning, before the fire engulfed it. The stench of burning flesh filled the room, thick and acidic. The thing thrashed, its limbs curling inward, its bones snapping until finally it stopped moving. The air was dead silent except for the flickering flame. Voss turned to the general, still strapped to the containment gurney. The alien had been watching the whole time. He wasn't struggling anymore. He wasn't even breathing hard. Voss grabbed him by the throat. "You knew." His voice was low, dangerous. The general's black, glassy eyes met his without fear. "It took your soldier." Voss tightened his grip. "What the hell is it?" The alien's mandibles clicked once. "Not Kelzar." A pause. Then, "Older." Voss let him go. The alien coughed, dark fluid spattering onto the steel floor. His wounds weren't healing. He wasn't like Cade, but that meant this wasn't an infection. This was something else. Dr. Harker stepped forward, still shaking. "If it's not viral, how is it spreading?" The general exhaled a wet, rattling breath. "It does not spread," Voss frowned. "Bullshit. Cade was fine when we left the warship." "It does not spread," the general repeated. His voice was softer this time. "It chooses." Something moved in the vent above them. Voss turned just in time to see two glowing, reflective eyes staring down at him from the darkness. Then it was gone. The vents were alive. Voss could hear it moving, a sound like wet flesh dragging against steel, like something breathing through too many mouths at once. The ship's emergency klaxons had been disabled. The only noises left were the distant hum of failing lights and the sound of boots on metal grating. 6 of them remained. Out of a full strike team, only 6 were still breathing. And the worst part, some of them might not be human anymore. Corporal Venn tightened her grip on her rifle, sweat slicking her face. "What do we do, sir?" Voss's mind was a whirlwind of half-formed thoughts, but only one thing was clear. This was no infection. It wasn't a parasite, wasn't some alien virus creeping through their bloodstreams. It was choosing. That meant it could think. He turned to the Kelzar general, still shackled but eerily calm despite everything that had happened. Voss had seen fear in the alien's face before, back on the warship. The same alien that had led extermination campaigns against human colonies. The same creature that had gutted men with his own serrated claws. And yet, in the med bay, when Cade was changing, the general hadn't shown defiance, only acceptance. Voss knelt in front of him, his rifle resting against his knee. "Start talking," the general exhaled, mandibles clicking. "You think I have answers? You knew this thing was on that ship." Voss's voice was level, but rage sat beneath it, coiled like a wire ready to snap. That wasn't just an ambush, was it? You weren't fighting us back there. You were running. The general's glassy black eyes reflected the dim emergency lighting. "We are born to war, human, but even warriors know when to retreat." Something thumped in the vents above them. Everyone tensed. Private Nielsen flicked his rifle's safety off. "It's moving." Voss ignored him. "What the hell is it?" The general's chest expanded, then collapsed inward, his body visibly trembling. Not out of fear, something else. Something deeper. "Do you know why the Kelzar leave no survivors?" Voss frowned. "What?" "You think us monsters," the general said, staring directly into his eyes now. "But we do not kill because we enjoy it. We kill because we must. If we take a planet, we burn it clean. No bodies, no remains. Not because of you." A long pause. "But because of it." The lights flickered. Something shifted in the darkness. The air felt wrong, as if the ship's metal hull had turned to bone, as if the temperature had dropped and yet sweat still beaded on the skin. Voss's fingers tightened on his rifle. "You've fought this thing before?" The general shook his head slowly. "No." That single word sent ice through Voss's spine. The alien's mandibles twitched. "We have always run." A scream ripped through the corridors. It wasn't human. It wasn't Kelzar. It was something in between. The vents burst open. A shape dropped into the hallway, landing on all fours. It was twisted, its body an amalgamation of two people fused together, their skulls split and reshaped, their arms melting into writhing appendages that twitched with alien hunger. Its lungs expanded and contracted without a chest cavity, exposed organs pulsing like some unfinished experiment that had decided to keep living. And the worst part, one of the faces still looked like Cade. He was still alive inside it. His mouth opened, his real mouth. But when the words came out, they weren't words at all. 1,000 wet, gurgling voices spoke at once. "We are not dead." Ven opened fire first. The bullets tore through flesh, but the thing didn't fall. It rearranged itself, absorbing the wounds, reshaping the damage, growing new muscle where old had been lost. Nielsen screamed and stepped back, but the thing moved too fast. It hit him like a flood of limbs, dragging him to the floor. His body twitched violently, his veins turning black and rotted within seconds. Then, his torso tore open, something pushing out from inside him. It was taking him. Voss grabbed a grenade from his belt and yanked the pin. "Down!" The blast ripped the corridor apart, sending metal shards and burning flesh in all directions. The creature shrieked, flailing as its body was consumed in fire. For a second it tried to rebuild itself, but the flame burned too hot. Then it collapsed into a heap of steaming, twitching parts. Silence. The air reeked of burned meat. Voss staggered to his feet, blood in his mouth. He turned to the general, still calm, still watching. "This thing," Voss panted, "it's not just a predator. It learns. It's getting stronger." The general's mandibles twitched once. "It has always been strong." Voss took a step forward, gripping his rifle. "How do we kill it?" The alien's black eyes reflected the corpse still twitching behind them. "You don't?" The ship was dying. The Hecaton's emergency lights flickered in the dark, pulsing like a heartbeat too weak to keep going. Somewhere in the bowels of the vessel, coolant systems hissed and failed, sending waves of heat rolling through the corridors. The air smelled of burning flesh, not all of it human. Voss wiped the blood from his face, but it wasn't his. It had belonged to Ven, to Harker, to Nielsen, to every last damn soldier who had fought and failed to survive this nightmare. Only two remained now, him and the general, and they were not alone. The thing was still here, still moving through the ship like rot in a corpse, still watching from the walls, the ceilings, the vents. It had killed them, absorbed them, made them part of itself. But it hadn't finished. It was hungry. Voss staggered forward, gripping his rifle even though he knew it wouldn't be enough. They had tried fire, explosives, bullets, vacuum exposure, even a direct reactor surge. And still, it had survived. Still, it had evolved. He and the general reached the bridge, or what was left of it. The control panels flickered with shattered glass and burned-out wiring. The pilot's chair was empty, but not because the pilot had escaped. Voss could still see what was left of them, half of a human skull fused into the bulkhead, the body long since absorbed into the ship itself. He hit the emergency distress beacon. No response. A dead signal. They were alone out here. The general exhaled, slow and steady. His mandibles twitched, his black insectoid eyes never leaving the darkness beyond the viewport. The asteroid field stretched around them, infinite and empty. But he could feel it too. The thing was coming. The walls breathed, pulsing with a sickening wetness, like veins beneath skin. The floor shifted, softening beneath their boots. It was everywhere now. Inside the ship, inside the structure, inside the very metal. It had eaten the hecaton. Voss turned to the general. "We can't fight it." The alien's gaze remained locked forward. "No." Voss's grip on his rifle tightened. "Then we have one option." The general's mandibles twitched. "Burn it." A cold, brutal understanding passed between them. There was no escape, no rescue, no survival. The only thing left to do was take the bastard down with them. Voss activated the manual reactor override. A soft, sterile voice chimed over the intercom. "Warning, critical containment failure. All personnel evacuate immediately." Voss let out a sharp, bitter laugh. There were no personnel left. The reactor countdown ticked down. 3 minutes until detonation. The ship shuddered, the air thickened, and then it arrived. The ceiling peeled apart. The thing was no longer human, no longer Kelzar, no longer anything that should exist in this universe. It had grown, its body an amalgamation of fused limbs, stretched open faces, rib cages blossoming into writhing, breathing horrors. It did not move like a creature. It slid, unfolded, expanded like a disease-given form. And it spoke. "Why do you struggle?" The voices came from inside it. Cade's voice, Ven's voice, Ashen's voice, warped and broken, stitched together from what it had consumed. Voss didn't answer. He raised his rifle one last time and emptied the entire magazine into its chest. The bullets tore through flesh that wasn't flesh, bones that weren't bones. But the thing did not die. It grew mouths where the wounds had been, grinning, whispering, laughing. Then the general moved. The alien launched himself forward, claws slicing through the creature's mass. The thing howled, splitting apart, tendrils snapping as it reeled back. But it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. The general was strong, but it was stronger. It grabbed him. Voss saw it happen, saw the general's body begin to break, begin to twist, begin to be pulled into the horror itself. And the alien did not scream. Instead, he turned his head, one last time, mandibles clicking. "Now, human." Voss didn't hesitate. He hit the manual override. Reactor meltdown initiated. The alarm screamed. The air turned white hot. The thing shrieked, its body splitting, burning, unraveling as the very core of the ship began to collapse in on itself. And in that final moment, as the world burned, Voss saw one last thing. He saw the general smile. The USS. Hecaton exploded in a blinding wave of fire, tearing through the void, disintegrating everything inside it. Nothing survived. Nothing should have survived. But days later, when a salvage crew arrived to investigate the wreckage, they found something floating among the debris. A single organic mass, still pulsing, still alive. It had survived. It had learned. And it was not done yet.